Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. I didn't expect to be haunted in this way by my job as a Millbrook County 911 dispatcher. After 7 years on the job, I felt like I had heard it all. Medical crises, domestic conflicts, and auto accidents. You learn to compartmentalize and grow a thick skin. But that October 2019 Tuesday night, everything was different. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. while I was working double shifts and my fifth cup of coffee was cold next to my keyboard. A local number appeared on the caller ID. Additionally, when I replied with my usual welcome. I heard breathing so softly that I nearly assumed it was a pocket dial. The whisper that still reverberates in my nightmares then arrived. The voice, almost heard, murmured, "Please help me." A young girl could not have been older than 16 or 17. "He's here. Tyler's here. And he's trying to get in." As we learned in training, I flagged it as priority 1 right away while maintaining a steady, composed voice. My fingers were flying across the keyboard, sending units to 1847 Maple Grove Lane, a peaceful area on the north side of town. The address that appeared on my screen, Emma Winters, was the girl's name. Additionally, prior incident reports flooded my screen as I retrieved her information. Restraining order against 19-year-old Tyler Brennan that was filed 3 months ago. Several allegations of stalking. When I realized this wasn't simply another frightened adolescent calling about a noise outdoors, a chill went through me. I placed on my headphone for greater audio quality and turned on the recording device, saying, "Emma, please remain calm. There will be officers soon. Now, where are you?" The sound of shuffling and rustling cloth was followed by a softer return of her voice. "I'm in the closet in my bedroom. In honor of their anniversary, my parents traveled to Indianapolis. They will not return till tomorrow afternoon." My heart fell. She was by herself. A rhythmic sound that made my skin crawl was now audible in the background. Thud, thud, thud. Like someone testing the strength of a door by kicking it. "Is the door to your bedroom locked?" As I sent more notes to the responding teams, I inquired. "Juvenile home alone themselves. The suspect is trying to get in," the answer was returned. "Units 45 and 23 are en route. 8 minutes is the estimated time of arrival." 8 minutes. And we know from our work that 8 minutes may last a lifetime. Emma's respiration quickened, more frantic. "He's already entered through the back door, though." In the kitchen, I heard a glass break. "He's yelling my name as he moves about downstairs." I heard her suppress a sob. Her voice broke on the final phrase. Now she could hear the footsteps on her phone. Slow, deliberate, heavy boots on hardwood floors. Tyler wasn't rushing. He was aware of her presence, knew she was stuck. "Elizabeth, Emma," a man's voice sung, clear enough to hear the tone of mockery, yet muffled. "Get out, darling. We should discuss why you have been neglecting me." The units were updated by me. Suspect inside the house. Then I heard it, stairs and footsteps, step by step. That characteristic creak of someone climbing. Emma murmured, "He's coming upstairs," and I could hear the fear choking her voice. I retrieved the house plan from the county records. Upstairs are 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. Emma had previously described her room as being at the end of the hall. "Emma, you must follow my instructions to the letter. Do you have anything in your closet? Can be used to block the door." Despite the adrenaline coursing through my body, I maintained a calm voice. "Units will arrive in 6 minutes. Through the line came the sound of doors opening and closing. Tyler was painstakingly inspecting every room. "It looks great in your mom's craft room." Emma's phone lurched with his voice. "Now closer. But you're not there, are you?" Emma was breathing so quickly that I was afraid she would be hyperventilating. "A dresser is present, however it weighs a lot. I am unable to." She gasped as a door somewhere in the house smashed. The handle of the bedroom door shook, first merely a test, then more forceful. "I know you're in there, Emma, darling. Your automobile was in the driveway when I noticed it. I've spent hours observing the house, awaiting the departure of your parents." He threw his weight against the door, which rocked, boom, through the phone. The sound was tremendous, and Emma whimpered in fear. "Tonight, don't force me to smash another door. You are aware of how much I detest it when you aggravate me." I was upgrading the units while typing furiously. "Suspect at the entrance of the bedroom, attempting to gain admission by force. Hurry up." My gut went cold at the response. "Unit 23 is dispatched here. Route 47 is blocked by a major accident, needing to take a different path. 12 minutes is the new ETA. 12 minutes. Even though I wanted to yell at them to speed up, so they could go off-road if necessary, I maintained my professional demeanor. I was needed by Emma. Serene. Boom, boom, boom. I could hear wood splintering now, and the door was being battered. "Listen to me, Emma. Does the closet have a window? These ancient homes occasionally have peculiar architectural elements." "No," she stumbled. "Simply clothing. And hold on, the ceiling has an attic access panel." I quickly dragged the house blueprints up once more, constructed in the traditional Cape Cod design in 1954. "Are you able to get there?" The silence was worse in some way, and the thumping abruptly stopped. Then Tyler's voice could be heard. "Now it's different. Perform a tune and act." Frightfully mischievous. "I saw all of the entries in your notebook about how much I was loved by you. Do you recall writing that you would perish without me?" A pause. "It's funny how things turn out." This time I heard the clear fracture of wood giving way. The bashing returned with new vigor. "I can't go to the panel." Emma had stopped trying to keep quiet and was crying now. Crash. I'm tugging at it. The door of the bedroom sprang open. Tyler's boots sounded slowly on the carpet. Unpurposeful. There we have it. Where is my girl hiding now? I could hear closet doors being wrenched open over the phone. One, then another. Except for a labored breathing, Emma had become silent, in the hopes that she might still find strength in my voice. I continued speaking while muting my end of the conversation, so Tyler wouldn't hear me. "Emma, don't talk. The officers will arrive soon. You will be all right." But I knew even as I said, we can all tell when someone is lying. My headphone was filled with the sound of hangers scrapping on metal. He was in her closet. Tyler responded, "Found you," with a tone of satisfaction in his voice. Emma let out a scream. The phone clattered. What happened next is burned into my memory like a brand. The line remained in contact even though she must have dropped it. "Please, Tyler, don't do this. I'll talk to you. Okay, we can talk." Emma was struggling, and I heard her begging. His response was icy. There were sounds of struggling, objects falling, and things breaking. "Too late for talking. You had your chance." 3 months of chances. Emma was defending herself. "Good girl," was my anxious thinking. "Remain vigilant. The unit suspect has gotten in touch with victim." My professional mask finally cracked as I sent it. Code 3. Code 3. Emma's voice, stronger than I expected. "I left because you were unwell. Tyler, you need help." Wrong thing to say. When you're defenseless on the other end of a phone line, violence has a certain sound signature. 7 minutes till units arrive. I can't even begin to explain the sounds that followed. It had been quiet for about 2 minutes when I heard the sirens on Emma's phone, not the kind of calm that indicates everything is well, but the kind that weighs heavily on your chest, like wet cement. I remained on the line, talking to no one, and repeatedly calling Emma's name. After hearing the officer's feet and the cries of police, "Show yourself," I assumed that one of them had finally located the phone, because I heard Officer Daniels' well-known voice saying, "Dispatch, we need Ems now." I also heard them alert the coroner. I couldn't let go of the headset, so my supervisor had to forcibly take it off my head. During my 7 years as a dispatcher, I had lost callers to heart attacks when emergency medical personnel failed to arrive in time and to horrific auto accidents. But Tyler ran, naturally, jumped out Emma's bedroom window and vanished. I had never lost someone like this before, someone who had been alive and struggling only minutes before, someone whose final words I heard: state police, helicopters, canine units. The manhunt began right away, and when Emma's parents returned home, they found press vans and crime scene tape in place of their daughter. The media quickly seized on the incident. The story was similar to Vulture's. Edited parts of my call with Emma were played, and a teenage girl died while on the phone with 911 12 minutes too late due to a system malfunction. Reporters set up camp outside the dispatch center, throwing microphones at anyone in uniform, and the department placed me on administrative leave while they looked into it. They claimed that this was standard practice, but it felt like blame. Her frightened murmurs turned into sound bites for the evening news. They arrested Tyler 3 days later, hiding in his uncle's hunting cabin to count his over, and I sat at home watching the coverage while they debated reaction times, budget, cuts, and whether we needed more officers on night shift. None of it would bring Emma back. I was asked to testify about the call, and Emma's mother looked directly at me when he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release after he entered a guilty plea to avoid the death penalty. I thought she would be angry and blamed for not doing more, but instead she mouthed, "Thank you." I started crying uncontrollably, and she discovered me pouring water in my face in the courthouse restroom. I ultimately went back to work, but nothing was the same. "You stayed with her," she said plainly. "She wasn't alone. That's what matters." I lasted 6 more months until I quit, relocated to a different area, and found a career in IT where the worst emergency is a server meltdown. But on quiet evenings, I can still hear her voice. Every call may be another Emma, and every delay could cost a life. The thing that haunts me the most is that I constantly see that timer counting down the minutes we didn't have, and I always question whether there was anything I could have said or done differently. The answer is always no. I was 3 hours into my dispatch shift at the Sheriff's Department in rural Wyoming on November 18, 2021, and I had been handling overnight dispatch for about 4 years at that point. The job primarily involved keeping an eye on our deputies on patrol, answering the occasional call regarding loose cattle or domestic disputes, and trying to Deputy Jason Holloway had drawn the eastern sector that Thursday, meaning he would be driving the long loops around Elk Ridge Wildlife Reserve. We ran a skeleton crew, dark, just 3 deputies covering nearly 800 square miles of wilderness, ranch land, and the occasional cluster of houses that passed 4 neighborhoods out here. This was necessary to keep awake through the long stretches of nothing. Unit 23 Jason, one of our newer guys, had only been with us for 2 years, but he had already shown himself to be reliable and solid. The first few hours went smoothly, and he checked in every 30 minutes as scheduled. Mile marker 47 was all clear. That kind of stuff. At approximately 11:40 p.m., he radioed that I logged his location and returned to my crossword puzzle, ever traveling up Forest Service, Road 92 to check on several campers who had been reported earlier in the week. Although the reserve officially closes at sundown, people occasionally disregarded the signs, especially during hunting season. Unit 23. This is dispatch. The next check-in was scheduled for 12:10 a.m., but Jason didn't say anything during that time. so I tried calling him on the radio at 12:15. I tried twice more before notifying Sergeant Coleman, who was patrolling the western sector, but all I got was that weird harsh static. Please report your status. Policy said that we would wait until 12:30 before starting search procedures, but at 12:28 a.m., as I was ready to formally call it in, Jason's voice erupted over the radio, but it wasn't his typical cool, collected tone. There was something about the sound of that stillness that made my skin tingle. His voice cracked and broke. They're just standing there, not moving. Dispatch, Unit 23. I've got there's someone out here on foot, middle of the road. He was panting heavily. After a long delay, I reached forward and grabbed my headphones. Unit 23. Can you characterize the individual? Do they look distressed? Their description is negative. They are standing motionless, wearing something dark, possibly a coat, and they are about 50 yards ahead. Their features are not discernible. Something else, a faint humming that seemed to pulse through the static, with Jason's motor idling in the background. Should I approach? He inquired, and for Jason's voice sounded unsure for the first time in 2 years, and before I could react, he spoke again, this time more quickly. They're moving, walking toward my vehicle. Something is wrong here. Dispatch. The transmission switched to static, and then returned, giving the impression that they are gliding rather than walking. Flying. I focused on Jason after radioing Coleman to go to Forest Service Road 92, Unit 23. Keep your distance. Don't get out of your car. On the way back up. However, Jason had stopped listening. His door chime was audible to me. He was leaving. Sheriff's Department. Are you okay, sir or ma'am? He stepped away from the radio and his voice turned aloof. I only had audio at the time, but the Bodycam film would eventually reveal what transpired. Heavy breathing and gravelly footsteps. Then, just a whisper, came Jason's voice. You're not that way. Then there was a sound I will never forget. As if they were bone wind chimes, tinkling in an imaginary breeze, there was a clatter of noise. From the radio, Jason screamed out of sheer confusion rather than fear. Like a person attempting to comprehend an impossibility. The face is incorrect. Then nothing, total quiet, not even static. My hand smacked against the button for the transmission. Unit 23, Jason, please answer right away. I kept repeating the call until my voice cracked. Pushing his cruiser hard on those. Coleman radioed that he was 15 minutes out, twisting. Roots in the mountains. I started a complete emergency response and informed Sheriff Morrison, volunteer firefighters, every available unit, and even a few off-duty officers who lived close. On Forest Service Road 92, everyone came together. The 15 minutes it took for Coleman to show up felt like hours. I continued to try to raise Jason, alternating between frantic pleas and formalities. Just key your microphone, Jason. If you can hear this, tell us you're still alive, please. At 12:51 a.m., Coleman reached Jason's last known location. His voice was strained with concern. I've located Unit 23. Dispatch. The car is moving. Lights on. Driver door open. The deputy hallway is nowhere to be seen. His movements throughout the scene were audible to me. He has his sidearm resting on the ground next to the car. The magazine is full. Doesn't seem to have lost their job. Outside the entrance is a radio handset. Faster now. More footsteps. Carla is there. The gravel has marks that appear to be from something being dragged. However, they only stopped around 20 feet away from the car, simply came to a complete halt. As he followed the drag marks, I could hear Coleman's respiration through my headphones. Here's his boot and his badge, only one foot in the wrong place. 10 minutes later, the sheriff showed there with 3 more units. The jungle appeared to engulf their flashlight beams as they established a perimeter and started a methodical search. Beyond the road, the darkness felt alive and ravenous in an inexplicable manner. Throughout the night, the search went on. At early light, dogs were brought in, but they wouldn't follow any track past the drag marks. With their tails tucked between their legs, they would whine as they approached that location and then retreat. The handler, Bill Hutchinson, a veteran with 20 years of search and rescue experience, claimed he'd never seen that behavior in his pets. Around 7 a.m., Jason's other boot was discovered by Deputy Melissa Thorne about a quarter mile into the forest, perfectly positioned at the base of a pine tree, as if it had been placed there on purpose. An hour later, his duty belt was found hanging exactly 15 feet off the ground over a branch. How it got there was a mystery. There were no low branches to climb, and the tree trunk was smooth. Everything we discovered was pristine, undamaged, and organized with an eerie attention that made my stomach turn. When we eventually watched the Bodycam footage, it simply made the mystery more complex. The video began rather normally. Jason's headlights pierced the darkness as he drove down the dark wooded road. 11:58 p.m. exactly as he had said. A figure emerged in the distance, standing still in the center of the road. Despite the blurry film quality, a tall, slender form wearing what appeared to be a long, dark coat was seen. The figure remained motionless and appeared to be breathing as Jason's cruiser drew closer. Then, with that terrible gliding motion had described, it started to move toward the car. It seems like feet never quite make contact with the ground. Jason called to the figure and got out. He was shown on camera moving forward, with his hand resting on his sidearm, without drawing it. About 10 feet away, the figure came to a stop. They faced one another for 3 seconds. The camera then captured a glimpse of the figure's face as it raised its head. At that very time, the video became garbled. It was corrupted in a way our tech specialist claimed he had never seen before, yet it wasn't destroyed or harmed. Pixels ordered themselves. Geometry that shouldn't be in a two-dimensional image into patterns that cause pain. Over the next few days, the hunt grew. FBI, state police, and 3 county volunteers. The Elk Ridge Reserve is being searched by hundreds of individuals. More of Jason's possessions were strewn over the woodland, all of them thoughtfully arranged. He had his wedding ring balanced on top of a rock formation that would have taken specialized climbing equipment to reach, his wallet stashed inside a hollow log, and his money and cards placed neatly. His uniform shirt was washed, draped over a bush in the middle of a ravine, and pressed as though just out of the dry cleaner. Jason himself, though, never. Beyond those first drag marks, there was never any blood or indication of struggle. I returned to dispatch on the 4th night of the hunt when Coleman radioed in from Forest Service Road 92. We had been checking the scene every few hours, and he was doing it now. His speech sounded unsteady. "You will not believe this, Carla. The precise location where we discovered Jason's cruiser is occupied by someone, just standing there in the same posture and position." I fumbled for the radio with my fingertips. "Are you able to recognize them? Is that Jason?" As he got closer, Coleman's cruiser camera started recording. "The figure is illuminated by headlights. No, I have no idea what this is. They are dressed in Jason's consistent. But we have proof of Jason's uniform. Carla, I personally logged it. I opened the log of evidence. He was correct. Jason's uniform was complete and in one piece. Don't come near. Coleman, await the backup." However, he was already leaving and moving in the direction of the person. His breathing was becoming labored, and I could hear his footsteps. "Please carefully turn around and hold your hands in front of me, sir." The figure remained still. Coleman approached. "I'm speaking to you, sir. Now turn around. Nothing has changed." When he halted, Coleman might have been 5 feet away. He gave a startled gasp. The face. No face is present, like skin stretched over a mannequin. It's merely smooth. Then Coleman let out a scream that chilled my blood with its utterly primordial fear. The radio paused to static. 8 minutes later, Backup arrived to find Coleman's cruiser empty, but the engine running and the doors locked from the inside. All he saw on his Bodycam was that same unfathomable depravity. The FBI took full control of the case when Coleman disappeared. They called in experts, those who handled extraordinary conditions. Not mine, but theirs. There was an indefinite closure of the Forest Service road. After 2 weeks, the search was cancelled because neither deputy could be located. However, it wasn't the end. It was only the start of something more serious. A month later, while on patrol close to the reserve, Deputy Thorne heard sobbing over her radio, not through dispatch, but through the static on an unnatural channel. She played it for me after recording it on her phone. Jason's voice was as clear as day as he called for assistance, stating that he was lost and that they would not allow him to go. The 43-second recording ended abruptly with that bonet chime sound. A hiker reported spotting to sheriff's deputies standing still in the forest, approximately a mile from the road. 3 months later, claimed that they appeared to be frozen in mid-conversation, facing one another and motionless. By the time rangers looked into it, they found only 2 sets of boot prints that appeared and disappeared without warning. 6 months after that night, I left the department, unable to manage the radio no longer. Every static burst sounded like Jason's attempt to get through. After 3 weeks, the new dispatcher, a young man called Kevin, to claim to have heard voices in the static. Others, not only Coleman and Jason, deputies from the 1970s and 1980s, older voices. They were all lost while on patrol close to Elk Ridge, so low units are no longer sent to that sector by the department. They've experienced too many near misses. Deputies reporting radios picking up, equipment breaking down, and figures on the road transmissions that are not possible. Coleman and Jason are listed as missing in the official report. Inactive but still open cases. Their family used empty caskets for memorial rituals. But I'm certain they're still alive, not precisely. You can occasionally still hear them out there requesting assistance that will never arrive on clear nights with ideal static, yelling about the face that isn't a face and warning about the figure on the road. The Forest Service has plans to increase the size of the reserve. I hope they don't. You shouldn't push certain bounds. It's best to leave some areas alone. It's still hungry. No matter what's out there in Elk Ridge, dressed in the faces and uniforms of our missing deputies, I'm still waiting for the next lone patrol to arrive on Forest Service Road 92, which is dark. At Riverside Police Dispatch, working the night shift typically meant coffee, solving crossword puzzles, and occasionally receiving reports of drunk drivers. After 3 years on the job, I had heard every possible explanation, heartwarming tale, and strange grievance. At 11:47 p.m. on a sweltering Thursday in early September 2022, a call from 847 Willow Street triggered the 911 system, changing everything. Dead air for 2 seconds, then nothing. When the address appeared, it was a condemned duplex that had been vacant for 18 months after a kitchen fire destroyed the east side. The location ought to have been demolished sooner, but financial constraints kept delaying it. Thinking that some kid had gotten inside and was playing with an old landline that somehow still had juice, I logged the hang-up and returned to my lukewarm coffee. Another call 20 minutes later. Identical address, identical pattern, a moment of quiet, and then a break. My neck began to tingle with hair. Recurring hang-ups from abandoned buildings, in my experience, typically indicated one of 3 things: either bad wiring, someone who was truly in danger and unable to communicate, or someone attempting to trick police into an ambush. As required by protocol, we sent a unit to, after receiving 2 calls from the same place, check. Officers Bradley and Martinez were on their rounds close to the industrial district when I radioed them. Bradley's tone seemed informal and unconcerned. They would stop by and most likely discover a homeless person who had broken through a window or some youngsters sipping alcohol that had been stolen. Simple things, yet my stomach continued to turn the way it does when a storm is approaching and the air pressure decreases. As I drove, I looked up the property records. The dental office that owned the duplex filed for bankruptcy and was later confiscated by the city for unpaid taxes. At 12:14 a.m., Bradley's Bodycam footage began to stream on my display. With peeling yellow paint, plywood covering most windows, and weeds growing through concrete step cracks, the duplex appeared worse than the pictures in our system. Damage from the fire on the east side had left claw-like black stripes up the outside wall. Bradley went to the front door, which was hanging ajar a little, while Martinez went around back. I felt my spine stiffen at that detail. After condemning these properties, city maintenance would always tightly seal them off. With his boot, Bradley shoved the door open, the flashlight piercing the interior darkness. He was instantly struck by the odor. His head snapped back, and I knew. Damage from smoke, mold, and other things he couldn't determine. Although the living room had been deconstructed to reveal exposed wiring and bare walls, new footprints appeared. On the floor amid the dust, various shoe sizes, multiple sets. Bradley was still standing in the doorway when the third call came through. Before the connection fell dead, raspy, and nearly gasping, I heard breathing this time. The outdated phone system only provided me with the main address, so I attempted to locate the precise origin inside the building. It crackled on Martinez's radio. He had located a window in the basement. It had just been forced open, as if someone had used a crowbar. The metal frame bowed outward. The rust has new scratches. Before they looked down the basement, Bradley made the decision to clear the first floor, going through the pasta kitchen. Ghostly outlines could be seen on the walls where the cabinets had been, either stolen or sold. However, a new addition sat in the corner, hardly discernible in the flashlight beam, and pricey camping cooler with a tight-fitting lid. With all that deterioration, the red plastic appeared strange. When Bradley opened it, he saw glass vials filled with clear liquid, plastic-wrapped syringes, and ice packs that were still partially frozen. At that moment, they heard a faint, repetitive humming coming from down below. It is more akin to a wordless chant than a song. Through the Bodycam stream, Bradley and Martinez looked at each other. Their shoulders were tense, and I could tell that they were holding their weapons a little more tightly. They headed for the basement door, which had been painted so many times that the layers had left tree bark-like ridges, as if someone had been scratching at it. New marks scribbled the paint close to the handle. As Bradley slowly opened the door, the humming became more intense. His weight made the wooden stairs creak. Every stride reverberated in the shadows. Beneath, Martinez covered him and followed. The basement extended beneath the duplex on both sides, which was longer than it should have been. There were orange extension lines running back to a portable generator buzzing in the corner, and emergency work lights, the type used by construction workers, had been strung along the ceiling. The thought of what they discovered down there still makes my skin crawl. Something between a hospital and a church had been built out of the basement. The walls were lined with notebooks, medical equipment, and printed pictures of youths on folding tables. Most are teenagers, some of whom hardly appear 13. Notes were scrawled on index cards at each intersection of the spiderweb of red yarn that connected the photographs. However, they were stopped cold at the center of the room. Heads bowed, 7 individuals reclined on pillows in a circle that, in perfect harmony, they hummed eerily from their throats. A girl, little older than 16, lay still on a camping mat in the center of their circle. Her pupils had dilated into dark pools, and her eyes were open but unfocused. What appeared to be permanent marker had been used to draw strange symbols on her arms. It was geometric patterns that appeared to change under the strong glare of the work light, but nothing demonic. The bag hung from a modified music stand, and then 4 drip flowed into her left arm. Bradley's voice boomed in the cramped room. He signaled the coming of the cops. As if someone had pulled a plug out of a socket, the humming abruptly ceased. The 7 heads turned in perfect time. At that point, I could clearly see their faces on the body cam. I didn't anticipate them. No crazy facial expressions. No wild hair. These folks had a typical, almost polished appearance. 4 men and 3 women, all between the ages of 25 and 50, were dressed in crisp, laid-back attire as if they had just left an office job. With wire-rimmed spectacles and gay hair, the oldest man gave the officers a friendly smile that was reminiscent of a pediatrician's practice. His voice was as silky as melted butter. When he introduced himself as Dr. Harold Vance, he clarified that they were using guided meditation as part of a therapeutic strategy to assist problematic adolescents in processing trauma. He assured them he had credentials and pointed to a briefcase close to the wall. Something about his speech made my teeth hurt. To willing. The girl on the mat was named Stephanie, and she had been homeless until they took her in, rehearsed. When Bradley inquired about the 4 drip, Dr. Vance clarified that it was a safe saline solution containing vitamins that kept the participants hydrated throughout their lengthy sessions. However, Martinez hadn't mentioned anything when he circled behind the group with his flashlight. The other members of the circle stayed motionless, hands folded in their laps, eyes tracking the officers with an intensity that seemed off, while one woman, perhaps 30, with strawberry blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, kept tilting her head at strange angles, as if she was listening to something that only she could hear. I heard more voices coming from upstairs over the radio, and Bradley called for help as Martinez checked on the girl. Her pulse was sluggish but steady, and she didn't blink when he shone his light in her eyes. Even blink, older puncture wounds, were scattered like constellations across her arms, and the track marks weren't just from the current 4. The 4th 911 call came through at that point, and I heard a voice this time. "Please," a young man whispered. "They won't let us go." As I watched Bradley's pasture shift on the camera feed, I patched this information to him right away. The line remained open for 8 seconds before shutting off. Dr. Vance's smile remained constant. The atmosphere in the room changed, and the circle members started to stand up to slowly, as if they were moving underwater, and I realized that their eyes all had the same dilated pupils as the girls. The woman with the strawberry blonde hair began humming again, a different tune this time, and the others joined in one by one, making the Bodycam audio crackle with static. Bradley told them to stay seated, but they continued to get up, forming a tighter circle around the officers. The children call when they're ready for the next step. Dr. Vance reached into his pocket, and both officers drew their weapons, but he only took out an old flip phone, holding it up like a peace offering. Martinez attempted to radio for that backup, but his words came through jumbled, as if the signal was being jammed. "Phase. They're upstairs finishing their personal inventory," he replied, his voice still unbelievably calm. "Would you like to meet them?" Bradley told him to put down the phone and get down. At the same time, one of the younger men in the circle took out a notebook and started drawing frantically, his hand moving across the page in sharp mechanical movements. The doctor continued to talk, explaining that they had been helping runaways for 13 months, giving them purpose and teaching them to shed their past traumas through chemical assistance and guided reconstruction. He claimed that the symbols on their arms were maps, showing the pathways from their old selves to their new identities. The backup units came, just as things went sideways, for more policemen thundered down the stairs, and the circle members scattered like roaches when you flick on a light. I could even see from the Bodycam footage that he was sketching the police station's floor plans. They didn't just run, though. They had a plan and followed it. 2 of them grabbed for the notebooks on the tables, cramming material into their teeth and chomping wildly. A strawberry blonde lady jumped for the girl on the mat and attempted to pull her toward a door that I had not previously noticed. Concealed behind a tall filing cabinet while another grabbed the 4 bags and punctured them with a pocket knife, causing the contents to flow across the concrete floor. Dr. Vance stood Martinez, and another officer restrained the girl, who was beginning to mumble incoherently about doorways and numbers. "You're interrupting crucial work," he said, as Bradley cuffed him, perfectly still in the chaos, hands raised, still wearing that horrible smile. "These children came to us broken. We're simply helping them become whole again." They discovered 12 additional children upstairs, all between the ages of 14 and 19, sitting in different rooms across the duplex, all of whom had the identical geometric symbols drawn on their skin, and all of whom were in different phases of whatever procedure. The worst part was the journals they discovered, hundreds of pages, where these children had been forced to write out their entire life stories repeatedly, each version of which was different. Some were alert but perplexed, asking when their next session would be. Others hardly responded to their own names. The whole thing fell apart over the next several weeks, and it turned out that Dr. Vance was a former psychiatrist who had lost his license in 2018 for dabbling with memory suppression techniques. It was slightly different until they couldn't recall which bits were true. They had been taking homeless and runaway teens, kids who wouldn't be missed right away, and putting them through this systematic breakdown of identity. The others were a mix of former patients and true believers he'd met through online forums about therapeutic reformation. The drugs in those vials were a carefully measured cocktail of hallucinogens and dissociatives to make. We saved a total of 17 children from that duplex, though some took months to fully regain their sense of self. The subject was suggestible without causing permanent physical damage. All of those 911 calls had been from children in the upstairs rooms, struggling to get to the phones the group used to track their progress through their chemical fog. Vincent Torres had been my partner for 8 months when everything changed that Friday night in August 2018. He was one of those seasoned cops who had seen every kind of call imaginable during his 22 years on the Clearwater Heights forced domestic disputes, drug busts, armed robberies, you name it. The building was demolished 2 months later, but occasionally on calm nights at dispatch, I still jump when a hang-up call comes through. We had been patrolling the quiet suburban streets since 1000 p.m., and he had this serene manner that came from experience, never shaken by the mayhem that usually sent rookies like me into a panic. He was 51 years old. The radio had been relatively quiet that night, with only a few noise complaints, and one drunk driver we'd pulled over around midnight, in the kind of neighborhood where the biggest excitement usually came from someone's sprinkler system breaking down or a raccoon getting into garbage cans. Vincent always insisted on driving past the old Restwood Cemetery during our rounds, saying that despite its serene appearance during the day, it was a magnet for trouble. The cemetery, which was built in the 1800s and contained generations of Clearwater Heights residents in ornate Victorian monuments and weathered family plots that the city hardly cared for anymore, spanned the whole eastern edge of the Maple Grove subdivision and had wrought iron gates that were frequently left unlocked by the negligent groundskeeper. Vincent had arrested more children there than anywhere else on our beat, and the street lamps threw an eerie glow across the cemetery entrance, casting long shadows that danced between the old oak trees, and most locals avoided the area after dark, not because it was superstitious, but because it was the scene of homeless camps and teenagers drinking stolen beer among the headstones. Around 2:30 a.m., Vincent reduced our patrol car to his typical crawling pace as we got closer to the gates, looking around for any indications of trespassers. That's when we both noticed her, a tiny child who looked to be about 7 or 8 years old and was dressed in what appeared to be a pale nightgown that seemed to glow against the darkness, was standing still between 2 tall granite headstones, barely visible in the dim light coming through the old trees in the cemetery. "Jesus Christ," Vincent whispered, instantly stopping the car and reaching for his flashlight. As like she were a part of the cemetery itself, her long, dark hair draped loosely about her shoulders, and she remained motionless, Vincent and I looked at each other. It was almost 3 in the morning when we discovered a child by themselves in a cemetery. Wasn't just out of the ordinary, it was extremely unsettling. My training came into play when I radioed dispatch to report a possible missing child, while Vincent got out of the car with his hands up in a non-threatening gesture. The young girl stood there staring straight ahead at something we couldn't see, her bare feet clearly visible, and she didn't move or acknowledge us. I pondered how long she had been standing there in the August heat against the dark grass, as Vincent made his way to the cemetery gates, yelling soft comforting words. I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The child's nightgown was not only pale, but also dirty, smeared with what appeared to be mud and grass, as though she had been out 4 hours. Her posture was stiff, unnatural, like a statue set among the headstones. Vincent asked her name, whether she was hurt, where her parents were, the usual inquiries we'd been taught to ask when dealing with children. The scene felt wrong in a way I couldn't describe, as if we'd stumbled into something that went against the natural order of things. But the girl never answered, never even looked at us, just stood there motionless, her small frame silhouetted against the moonlight filtering through the oak branches. I grabbed my own flashlight and jogged around the perimeter, my boots crunching on the gravel path that bordered the cemetery, after Vincent motioned for me to circle around the other side of the fence, thinking perhaps we could approach her from both directions without startling her. The girl stayed still. I stood about 20 feet away from her. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the moonlight, and her eyes were wide open, staring at something beyond the headstones. But what really caught my attention was how completely still she was at the other side. Close enough to see her more clearly, but far enough away not to appear menacing. The girl's lips never moved, never even twitched, as Vincent, who was now inside the cemetery grounds, asked her about her family, whether she lived nearby, and whether someone had hurt her. Spoke in the soft tone he usually reserved for victims of domestic violence. It was not the twitchy stillness of a scared child, but a complete immobility that seemed impossible for someone her age. Her nightgown was ripped at the hem, exposing more dirt, and what appeared to be minor cuts on her legs, and her breathing was so faint that I couldn't tell if she was breathing at all. Vincent stepped closer, his flashlight being carefully aimed at the ground, so as not to blind her. The oddest thing struck me at that moment. Even though she had been standing on wet grass for hours, the soreness of her bare feet were immaculate. No dirt, no grass stains, nothing that would suggest she had wandered through a graveyard in the middle of the night. The girl finally moved, but not in the way we had anticipated. Vincent was now just 10 feet away, close enough to touch her shoulder, if necessary, and he squatted down to her eye level, his speech taking on the fatherly tone he used with his own grandkids. Rather than face Vincent or acknowledge him, she just turned 90 degrees to the left, as though she were on a turntable, and started walking farther into the cemetery, her feet smooth and frighteningly elegant, but utterly silent. No footsteps, no fabric rustling, nothing. Vincent and I followed her, our flashlights piercing the darkness as we tried to keep her in sight. But she kept walking between the headstones, her white nightgown getting harder to see as she moved away from the street lights. The cemetery was bigger than it looked from the street, with winding paths that led deeper into parts that were more than a century old, where tall monuments and mausoleums made a labyrinth of shadows. And the girl seemed to know exactly where she was going, walking deliberately, never faltering at intersections or stumbling over the uneven ground that forced Vincent and me to take our time every step. She never answered when we called out to her repeatedly, claiming to be police officers, and we only wanted to help her get home safely. Instead, she continued to walk silently deeper into the cemetery, and after following her for about 5 minutes while swerving between ornate headstones and memorial benches, I realized we were getting close. The graves in the oldest part of Westwood date back to the 1800s, and many of them were unmarked or had inscriptions that were to warn to read. The girl came to a sudden stop, beside a big granite statue of an angel. Its wings spread wide, and Vincent and I were about 15 feet away, both of us gasping from the chase through the rough ground, and for a moment, she stood there exactly as she had when we first saw her, completely still, staring straight ahead. The girl's nightgown appeared to sparkle in our flashlight beams, and her hair was longer than I had initially assumed, almost to her waist. Vincent made another attempt to get her attention, speaking softly but firmly, explaining that we were concerned for her safety, that her parents were likely afraid, and that we only wanted to assist her in getting home. The girl turned away, head a little, just enough, so we could see her profile in the incandescent light. Her eyes were black in the darkness, but her face was calm, even tranquil. And then, without any forewarning or slow movement, she was no more. One moment, she was standing behind the statue of the angel. The next moment, the area was deserted. Vincent and I both hurried forward, searching desperately with our flashlights, but we only found the memorial's cold stone and untouched grass. For the next 2 hours, we combed through every area of that cemetery, phoning for help, and Vincent had the groundskeeper unlock the maintenance shed and storage areas, thinking she might have hidden there, and he brought in more officers with powerful searchlights, sealing off the entire area, while we meticulously searched behind every headstone, inside every mausoleum, and around every memorial structure big enough to conceal a child. The strangest thing was that our tracks were plainly visible in the soft dirt surrounding the angel statue, but there were no tiny footprints anywhere nearby. The grass where the girl had been was completely gone. The entire situation made no sense, and as the hours went by, I could see the frustration and confusion building in Vincent's weathered face. The standing wasn't even disturbed, and there was no sign that anyone had been there at all. By dawn, search dogs were brought in, and they found no human scent beyond what Vincent and I had left behind. Without answers, Vincent and I each delivered our story, recounting the same implausible incident, and Captain Morris showed there at about 6 a.m. demanding a detailed explanation of why half the night shift was searching a cemetery for a lost child without a missing person complaint. When the security footage from the municipal building across the street arrived, with the timestamp showing our patrol car stopping at 2:47 a.m., the captain listened with the kind of skepticism reserved for officers who had been on the job too long and were beginning to see things. The video clearly showed Vincent and I talking to empty air, following nothing, and looking for someone who wasn't there. It also showed us getting out and following something through the cemetery with our flashlights, but no children were ever captured by the cameras. Either Vincent and I had experienced some sort of shared hallucination, or we had come across something that didn't register on electronic surveillance equipment. But Captain Morris played the recording 3 times, and each time I felt a sick feeling that made my chest tighten. 3 days later, the investigation took an unexpected turn when, during a routine patrol of the area, Officer Amanda Chen came across a makeshift homeless camp located approximately a quarter of a mile from the cemetery, tucked away in a dense grove of trees that surrounded an abandoned lot. The shelter was rudimentary but well established, with a large tarp stretched between several trees, creating a living space that had clearly been used for months. Amanda discovered sleeping bags, camping gear, and multiple plastic bags containing children's clothing, including tiny dresses, underwear, socks, and a white cotton nightgown that was exactly like Vincent and I had described, all for a girl. About 7 or 8 years old, toys were also strewn all over the place. The discovery was made even more disturbing by the fact that none of the clothing matched any missing person reports from the previous 5 years, and that some of the items still had tags attached, indicating that they had been recently purchased rather than belonging to a real missing child. The items included a small music box that played a haunting lullaby when opened, a worn stuffed rabbit, a camp, and several picture books. The entire camp was processed as a crime scene by Captain Morris, but the homeless woman who had been living there was nowhere to be seen. The neighborhood's neighbors said they occasionally saw an elderly woman with long grey hair walking around the neighborhood, sometimes pushing a grocery cart full of belongings or carrying shopping bags, but she never spoke to anyone, never caused trouble, and simply lived on the periphery of the community like so many others. Food that was only a few days old, a campfire that had been extinguished but still smelled of smoke, and the camp's obvious evidence of recent abandonment made it seem as though she had disappeared about the time Vincent and I had. The case was eventually filed away as unexplained, but Vincent retired early that winter, claiming he could no longer patrol those streets without thinking about that night. 5 years later, I still drive past Restwood Cemetery during my shifts. Following our encounter with the child, we never located the woman, never received any answers regarding the children's clothing or toys, and never saw the girl again. The gas station off Route 117 was one of those places that hardly changed over time, and sometimes I slowed down near those old headstones, wondering if I'll see her again. That silent child who came and went like morning mist, leaving only questions and the memory of something that shouldn't have existed. A few locals went in for lottery tickets or smokes on their morning commute, and even though I wasn't assigned to that area of town very often, I knew it well enough to recognize the flickering sign, the creaking glass door, and the smell of burnt coffee every time you stepped inside. And by the time the day shift arrived, the overnight worker, Greg, I believe, always left the place immaculate. However, that morning, when we received a call shortly after 6 a.m., a customer complained that the station lights were on and the door was unlocked, but that no one was inside. Something wasn't quite right. When I pulled up, there was only one car in the lot, not running, the front door slightly open, the fluorescent lights buzzing as usual, and the radio behind the counter. He had waited for at least 10 minutes before phoning it in. Was playing classic rock, which is very loud, for a location that is empty. I came in and announced myself, but there was no response. I checked the restrooms, the supply closet, and even the walk-in refrigerator, but there was no obvious evidence of theft, and Greg's windbreaker was draped over the chair behind the counter, with a half-empty bottle of Mountain Dew next to it. Condensation still on the plastic. Around 2:40 a.m., I radioed in and began looking over the security tape from the office in the rear, which showed the front door, the counter, and most of the interior aisles, but just missed the back exit. It was as if he had just gotten up in the middle of a shift and disappeared. Greg, who is first positioned casually with one hand on his hip and the other waving, is seen walking to the front door, turning the lock, and standing there speaking to someone just beyond the frame. After that, there is no signal for precisely 17 minutes, and the video skips, not a glitch. I mean, it cuts totally. The store is completely empty when it starts up again. No Greg, no sign of whoever was outside, but the mop buckets tipped over near the back exit, leaving a wet trail halfway across the floor. I asked for a copy of the video and called the owner of the gas station, who informed me that they had been broken into a few days earlier. The DVR hard disk, which had been changed just before Greg's shift, was the only item taken, and whomever had tampered with it knew exactly what they were after. We looked at the logs and found that no gas had been pumped after 2:40 a.m. and no purchases were noted. We spoke with the final 3 patrons who had visited that evening, and none of them reported seeing anything unusual. By the end of that week, we had followed up on every lead we had, including friends, relatives, and former co-workers. Greg had no enemies, no known conflicts, and no indications of stress or trouble in his life. It was stated that he appeared a little unfocused, but nothing more. The strangest thing was that his phone was discovered in the station's back room, plugged into the wall as though he had intended to return for it. He lived alone, rented a studio apartment about 10 minutes from the station, paid his bills on time, had no criminal record, and according to his manager, was always early for shifts. I checked over everything again. The door lock, the mop bucket, the silence in that video. It felt exact, not random or like a heist. Something about that establishment stuck in my mind, and I drove back out there the following Monday just to take a quick, off-the-clock walk through it again. I noticed that the register drawer was left open, untouched, and that there was a trail of dirty water drying close to the rear exit. There were no drag marks, no overturned shelves, not even a scuff on the tile, and I tried to imagine Greg's routine knocking the door, maybe hearing a knock, assuming it was someone he knew, but then what? Then he was gone, as if a hole had silently formed beneath his feet and engulfed him. 2 weeks later, I was called to another gas station across the county, this one brand new, part of a chain. The call was almost the same. The customer arrives early, the lights are on, the doors are unlocked, and the cashier is nowhere to be seen. Rebecca TR, a 27-year-old part-time night worker, was in the same predicament at school during the day. The register was open. The phone was still charging. Behind the counter, the coffee was half full, and the security footage was still there, was worthless. The store was quiet, deserted, and the mop had been pushed over in the supply closet when the camera's feed was lost at 2:37 a.m. for precisely 16 minutes. I don't know what I expected to see, but I drove right back to the original spot that evening and sat in my cruiser in the parking lot, simply observing. There was something strange about the nighttime silence there, like it was waiting for something. When you're by yourself in a public place with intense lighting, even the sound of the light bulbs becomes accusatory. I couldn't stop thinking about the missing footage not tampered with, but purposefully deleted. Whoever we pulled every camera feed from nearby businesses both times in the hopes of catching a glimpse of whoever Greg or Rebecca had spoken to. But nothing was visible. Either the person never crossed a lens, or they knew exactly how to avoid being seen. They didn't want the person gone, and they didn't want the moment of it to exist at all. We looked into it, but the phone disconnected. The service logs appeared to have been tampered with after the fact. The addresses used on the forms traced back to a strip mall that had been demolished more than a year ago, and the cameras cut around the same time, down to the minute, in both cases, with the same third-party contractor having recently serviced both systems. I tried calling Rebecca's parents, but it felt like we were chasing smoke. Her mother said that the night before Rebecca disappeared, she had received a call from her number, but all she could hear was static and weak clicks on the line, leading her to believe it was a butt dial. I couldn't tell her what to make of it because I didn't know myself, but after giving it some attention, she said that there was a rhythmic quality to the static, more like breathing than interference. Eventually, it became more of a message than a missing persons case, but I had no idea who it was for or whether it was still developing. Both gas stations quietly shuttered a month after Rebecca vanished. I occasionally pass past the one on Route 117, where the sign is still there, unlit, and the pumps are wrapped in yellow tape, sun-faded, and blowing in the breeze. Corporate never made a public comment, citing security concerns, and the night positions were never filled again. They moved me to traffic details 6 months later, but every time I walk by it, I can still see Greg standing behind the counter, counting scratch-offs, and talking to some shadow that is just out of sight. I always wonder what happened in those minutes that were missing, what he saw, what he heard, and what made him leave everything behind. Didn't fight it. Nowadays, when I'm on patrol after midnight, I steer clear of convenience stores completely. It's not that I'm afraid, I just feel that some places eventually cease to be places and turn into traps masquerading as routines. Once you enter at the wrong time, say to 40 in the morning. Music. Let me begin by mentioning that I work as a park ranger at Blackwood Forest Preserve in northern Michigan, and I still have nightmares about what happened to me last March. By that time, I had been working the night shift for nearly 3 years, primarily dealing with the preserve spans almost 8,000 acres of dense pine and oak with hiking trails that wind through valleys most people never bother exploring. At 34, I thought I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me, whether it was teenagers having a good time or the occasional lost hiker. I lived alone in a small cabin just outside. My routine was straightforward: patrol the main trails, check the camping areas, and make sure the gates were secured before midnight. I was divorced for 2 years and, to be honest, loving the isolation. It was a pleasant job, just what I needed after my messy breakup. It began like any other Friday night with my ex-wife, Lisa. I had a coffee at the petrol station on Route 47 and was going about my daily business when my radio came on at 11:30 p.m. when Nancy, the dispatcher, relayed a call from two hikers who had been camping near the South Ridge. She sounded unusually tense. They reported hearing children crying somewhere deep in the forest beyond the marked trails, and they claimed that the sound had been coming closer to their campsite for more than an hour. When I pressed Nancy for more information, she said the hikers appeared truly frightened, not the typical inebriated college students pulling practical jokes. They were seasoned outdoor enthusiasts, a Grand Rapids father and son who had been camping in our preserve 4 years, and they were able to distinguish between animal noises, and the temperature had dropped to about 28, and my breath formed little clouds in the beam of my light as I grabbed my flashlight and made my way toward the South Ridge, my boots crunching through the frost-covered leaves, and they were positive they were hearing human voices, children in distress. I heard it too. Closer to where the camper was, a low-pitched wailing that seemed to float through the trees like smoke, not continuous, but rather in waves, at times sounding like several voices overlapping, and it made my skin crawl away. I had never heard before. Over the years, there have been many odd sounds in the woods, including coyotes, owls, and even the occasional mountain lion making its way through. However, this one sounded distinctly human, distinctly young, and distinctly afraid. At the hiker's campsite, I discovered Tom and his 16-year-old son, Jake, huddled by their fire, both of them looking pale and shaken. What was even more unsettling was the way it seemed to move, first coming from the east, and then shifting to the north, as if whoever was making the noise was lost in the darkness. Jake kept looking toward the tree, his young face tight with anxiety. Tom was a burly man in his 50s with graying beard and calloused hands, the kind of guy who would help you change a flat tire in the rain and never complain about getting dirty. I had spoken to him a lot over the years as they were getting ready for the night. They told me that the sobbing had begun at around 9 p.m, and initially they believed it might be a practical joke, but as the hours went by and the noises persisted, they came to the conclusion that something was. They'd called 911 because they were afraid someone might be hurt or lost, but they were also genuinely scared by how strange the whole situation felt. So I decided to look into it further. Tom had even tried walking toward the noise with his own flashlight, but every time he got close, the crying would stop completely, only to resume from a different direction minutes later. Telling Tom and Jake to wait while I went into the woods, I followed what appeared to be a deer path heading northeast, deeper into the preserve than most visitors ever went, and even though the crying had stopped for 10 minutes or so, I could still feel the forest itself holding its breath. After maybe 20 minutes of walking, I came upon something that stopped me cold. Carved into the bark of a huge oak tree were rudimentary drawings that appeared to have been made with a knife or sharp rock. A flashlight pierced the darkness, illuminating twisted branches and shadows that seemed to dance just beyond my vision. The carvings were fresh, and I could still see sap. They displayed stick figures of people and children, but the youngsters were always kept apart from the adults, sometimes with lines put between them like walls. In some of the designs, the stick figures' eyes seemed like they were crying, gushing from the wounds. As I looked at the tree more attentively, I saw other markings all over the place. A nearby pine had numerals carved into it, and someone had etched the words "complain" in even letters on a birch tree about 30 feet away. There was no obvious pattern, but what particularly chilled me was what I discovered behind a group of dense bushes, a makeshift shelter, not the kind you'd expect from a normal homeless camp, but something more purposeful and eerie, made out of branches and tarps that had been woven together to form a low tunnel-like structure that you'd have to crawl to enter. The smell emanating from the shelter's entrance, where dozens of small items, mostly broken or filthy children's toys, and clothing that appeared to have been there 4 months, were arranged in a neat row, including stuffed animals with missing eyes, a red 3-wheeled wagon, and multiple pairs of small shoes. I radioed for backup right away, probably sounding more scared than I meant, because the smell coming from inside the shelter was sour and organic, like rotting food mixed with something else I couldn't identify, to county sheriff's deputies and Detective Angela Forster, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in missing persons cases, arrived within an hour. After cordoning off the area, we conducted a thorough search of the shelter and the woods around it. On the ground, we discovered sleeping bags, canned food, and dozens of handwritten notes, all in the same handwriting, rambling about teaching the lonely to sing the right songs and bringing them home. Some of the notes contained what the most unsettling finding was: a set of photographs hidden inside a waterproof container. But Detective Forster bagged everything as evidence, her face growing grimmer with each item we found. What looked like schedules with dates and times written next to descriptions, like the boy with the red jacket and the girl who walks alone. A 47-year-old drifter named Carl Hendris owned the shelter. He had been living off the beaten path in various forest preserves throughout the Midwest for more than 6 years. The investigation that followed turned up details that still make my skin crawl, including pictures of kids riding bikes, playing in parks, and walking to school. In 2017, his sister reported him missing in Wisconsin, but no one had been actively searching for him. The case became even more disturbing when it was discovered that Ricks had been using recordings of children crying, real recordings he had somehow managed to get his hands on to entice people further into the woods. Detective Forster informed me that they discovered evidence connecting Ricks to at least 3 missing persons cases from the forest. He had placed tiny, battery-operated speakers throughout the forest, controlled by a remote device he kept in his shelter. The notebooks we found revealed that the plan was to draw worried adults who would come looking for distressed children, then somehow overwhelm them when they were alone and vulnerable. The most disturbing aspect was that we never found Ricks himself. By the time we found his camp, he had already disappeared into the wilderness. The manhunt that followed, which involved search teams, lasted 3 weeks and involved people who went missing while hiking or camping in remote areas in neighboring states. Using dogs, helicopters, and thermal imaging equipment, we combed through every inch of Blackwood Forest Preserve and the surrounding wilderness areas from 5 different counties. I hardly slept during those weeks, constantly looking over my shoulder while on patrol and jumping at every sound in the woods. We discovered more evidence of Ricks's activities strewn throughout the preserve, including more speakers concealed in tree hollows, more carved messages on distant trees, and places that had previously seemed serene and familiar now felt ominous and full of hidden dangers. The entire experience altered my perspective of the forest I had called home 4 years. The man himself, however, remained a ghost, always one step ahead of our search efforts, despite trees and a few other makeshift campsites that indicated he had been moving around the area for months. Detective Forster surmised that he had been watching us the entire time, using his understanding of the terrain to stay hidden while we stumbled around trying to find him. Local authorities set up surveillance around the Wisconsin site after a park ranger in northern Wisconsin reported finding a similar setup: speakers, carved trees, and disturbing notes in a state forest about 200 meters from our location. The handwriting was exactly the same as Ricks's, and the modus operandi was the same as well. The arrest took place at dawn on a Wednesday morning in April, and after 4 days of waiting, they finally spotted him. Rhys was gaunt and wild-looking, with matted hair and clothes that hadn't been washed in months, and he confessed to using the crime recordings to lure at least 7 people into remote areas. He said he was gathering people who would share his vision of living away from society, but his methods were obviously violent and predatory. Over the past 2 years, some had escaped when they realized they were being hunted, but others weren't so fortunate. The FBI discovered evidence linking Carl Rhys was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but the damage he had done to my sense of security in the woods was irreversible. I continued working as a park ranger for another 6 months, but every night shift became an exercise in paranoia. He was responsible for disappearances in 4 states, making him one of the most common predators to operate in wilderness areas. Even though it wasn't necessary for my job, I started carrying a sidearm since every sound in the dark made me uneasy, and every shadow seemed to conceal a possible threat. I would frequently check my radio to make sure support was only a call away. Tom and Jake, the hikers who had first reported the crying, never returned to Blackwood Forest Preserve, but I knew that tenacious predators would always find ways to exploit the vast, remote areas that make these places so beautiful. The preserve upgraded the lighting along the main trails and added more security cameras. I eventually moved to another park nearer the city, one that Tom called a few months later to thank me for taking their report seriously, but he acknowledged that the experience had ruined camping for his family, and none of us could easily forget the idea that someone could use our instinct to help children in distress as a weapon. The Ricks case taught me that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the places we go to find solitude and peace, but it also taught me the value of following your gut when something doesn't feel right. That night, if Tom and Jake hadn't called, if I hadn't taken their report seriously, Ricks might have. I sometimes wake up believing I hear children wailing in the distance, but I remind myself that the real monster was captured and imprisoned. The forest itself isn't bad. It's simply a place where people might vanish if they're not careful. He's been playing his twisted game for months or years. The wilderness can be harsh enough without human predators making it worse, so I always advise hikers to stay on designated trails, camp in designated areas, and never explore strange sounds alone. As for Ricks, he's spending the rest of his life in a concrete cell, which is exactly where he belongs. At the time, my boyfriend and I were renting a small 2-bedroom house just outside of Asheville. The home had those yellowed light switches from the 1980s, fading floral wallpaper, an odd little hatch in the hallway ceiling that led to the attic crawl space, and an old-fashioned charm. The rent was reasonable for the neighborhood, and the landlord, Mr. Ellis, was one of those old-fashioned guys who, wearing the same sun-drenched Braves cap, he still used a flip phone and wrote receipts by hand, and he hardly ever showed up except to pick up rent or trim the patchy front lawn himself. We had only been living there a few months when things began to go weird, and initially it was small things, with the remote on the floor, the pantry door partially open, and the towel falling off the rack in the bathroom. My boyfriend Kyle assumed I was the one who was losing things. I dismissed it, supposing it was the wind or perhaps I had done it unconsciously. Then the noises began, faint creaks at night, like wood settling, which is a common occurrence in ancient houses, but we began to hear them at very particular times, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning. We attempted to explain it away: mice, possibly a raccoon. The attic wasn't insulated, so animals coming in didn't seem impossible. Occasionally, there was a faint knock behind the bedroom wall, followed by a slight thump here and a dragging noise there. On one particular night, however, I woke up to a low, shallow sound that sounded like breathing coming from the vent above our bed, not loud or rhythmic, and I sat up in the dark, gazing at the ceiling, my heart pounding. I laid there for almost an hour, too terrified to even reach for my phone, but Carl didn't hear it since he sleeps like a corpse. The following morning, I told myself I was just plain exhausted, and we continued as if nothing had occurred. The pivotal moment occurred when Carl swore he left his earbuds on his desk and discovered them in the kitchen drawer, hidden beneath the oven mitts. It may seem little, but he never placed anything in that drawer, which was full of miscellaneous items. We were both out until late that day, so I didn't say anything straight away, just kept observing. And then I observed that my shampoo bottle was moved to the opposite end of the tub, as if someone had used it. 3 days later, I discovered the frame perfectly straight, and the toilet paper completely replaced a brand new roll after Kyle insisted it wasn't him, tilting the picture frame in the hallway, folding the corners, and setting up tiny traps. I called Mr. Ellis that afternoon and informed him that we were hearing noises and suspected perhaps an animal had gotten into the walls or the attic. He didn't seem shocked, just sighed deeply and said he would come by with a ladder in the morning. He arrived with a flashlight and one of those long metal grabber tools that grocery stores use to reach high shelves. He opened the attic hatch, took a quick look inside, and I no kidding, the man's face became pale as he stood there, muttering, "No, that's not right," without even climbing up. He retreated, instructed us to wait outside, and then dialed the police without even stating why. After about 20 minutes, 2 policemen arrived, one of whom, Officer Brent, spent a considerable amount of time up in the crawl space, wearing gloves and a respirator, while the other remained below, questioning. US. He continued whispering things through the soundproofing, such as Jesus Christ, I recall. When he eventually descended, he was carrying a crumpled blanket, a few plastic grocery bags filled with rotting food, a few household things, 2 forks, one of my hair ties, and Cole's baseball cap. You won't believe this. The worst part, according to him, was that it appeared as though someone had been living up there for weeks or months. They brought in another unit to thoroughly inspect the attic, and that's when they discovered it, a tiny vent behind our bedroom wall that was hardly perceptible unless you looked for it. I recall Carl simply repeating, "That's our room," as one of the officers with a gloved hand took out a little mounted GoPro that was hidden between the slats, its red light flickering as if it had just run out of battery. "Dude, that is our bed." At that moment, I realized that someone had been watching us, not just concealing, but watching and recording. The crawl space had a direct view of that vent, as if it had been placed there on purpose, and the camera had a micro SD card. I'm not sure exactly what was on it, but I heard one of the police outside remark it had weeks' worth of recordings, and they took it away right away. Carl had trouble sleeping that night. We sat in the living room with all the lights on, hardly talking, and every little sound made my skin crawl. At one point, I found myself looking at the vent once more, wondering how many nights I had gotten dressed, slept, or otherwise prepared. I couldn't even pass the hallway without checking the ceiling. We moved out 2 days later, and instead of waiting for the official notice, I packed a bag, contacted my sister, who lived across town, and pleaded with her to allow us rest in a guest room. I sobbed in that room while someone was directly above us, watching through a small hole in the wall. I don't think he wanted to know more than he already did, but Mr. Ellis was understanding, perhaps even embarrassed, and he said he'd pay the cost of breaking the lease without asking any questions. The implication was obvious, even though they never identified themselves or mentioned whether they had caught anyone. Whoever had been residing in that crawl space had access to our house, likely from the beginning, and we were unaware of it. They could have come down while we were asleep, or even stood in the hallway while we were watching TV, and we would have choked it up. 2 shadows or our imagination. Kyle and I didn't stay together for long after that, and I continued to check the vents in every room I entered, and to lock the bathroom door even when I was by myself. One night, I found him standing under the hallway hatch, flashlight in hand, without saying anything. I asked him what he was doing, and he simply said, trying to hear if they ever left. He tried to act like it didn't bother him up, but I think it shook him more than he let on. After that, we didn't discuss it. A month or so later, I received a call from a detective who stated that although they had found fingerprints, they couldn't find a match in the system, and that the setup was planned and neat in its own right. The thing that remained with me the most was not that someone lived above my ceiling, but rather that whoever had chosen us had chosen me in particular. Based on the camera's positioning, I still worrying about the fact that they picked me out of all the houses on that block, and I don't even know why they watched me sleep. I currently live in a third-floor apartment. No crawl space, no attic, and no vents that I can't see into. Occasionally, I wake up from a dream about the blinking red light with the impression that someone has just retreated into the shadows. I don't know if the individual was ever apprehended. I didn't return to inquire. Perhaps that's my biggest fear. Uncertain if they remain in existence. Not knowing if that same blinking light may be discovered in another home one day, and acknowledge that they haven't been completely alone. The night was heavy with silence when the landlord finally arrived, a flashlight in one hand and a long metal grabber tool in the other. I watched him approach the hallway hatch with a mix of dread and curiosity. The faint glow from the porch, light casting long shadows on the faded floral wallpaper. Without hesitation, he popped the hatch open and shone his light into the cramped attic crawl space above our bedroom. His face drained of color as he whispered, "No, that's not right," before retreating to the floor below. We waited anxiously in the living room, the air thick with tension and the distant ticking of the old clock on the wall. Minutes later, the police arrived. Officer Brent was the first to climb up, wearing gloves and a respirator mask. I heard muffled sounds, whispers, and the occasional sharp intake of breath, then silence. When he finally descended, his hands were full, a crumpled, stained blanket, several plastic bags filled with rotting food, a few household items that sent chills down my spine, my hair tie, Carl's baseball cap, even a couple of forks. "This," he said quietly, "this wasn't just a hiding place. Someone's been living here. Watching you." My heart hammered as the weight of his words sank in. Later, the officers found the small vent behind our bedroom wall barely noticeable, unless you knew to look, and nestled between the slats was a hidden camera, its red light flickering weakly before dying out. The crawl space had a clear view into our room, a secret window into our lives that had been open for months. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the old house felt amplified. I kept staring at the ceiling, imagining the glowing red eye that had followed my every move in the dark. *** for the next 2 days, Kyle and I barely spoke. The house felt suffocating, every shadow a potential hiding spot, every sound a warning. We barely touched our food, the paranoia gnawing at us like a relentless hunger. At night, I found myself creeping down the hall, flashlight in hand, staring up at that hatch, half expecting to see a figure lurking above. When the police took away the camera and the evidence, I begged them for answers, but they told me it was complicated. No clear fingerprints matched any records, no signs of forced entry, and no suspects. Whoever had been living above us was a ghost, meticulously careful and terrifyingly patient. Mr. Ellis, the landlord, was apologetic, offering to cover the cost of breaking our lease. The implication was clear. We weren't safe here anymore. The thought that someone had been watching me sleep, moving silently through the crawl space just above my head, made my skin crawl. It wasn't just an invasion of privacy, it was a violation of my very sanctuary. That night, I packed a bag and fled to my sister's house across town. I sobbed in a guest room, haunted by the thought that the blinking red light might still be out there somewhere in another home, another bedroom waiting to watch, waiting to know. Kyle and I didn't last much longer after that. The fear lingered, even after we left. I never stopped checking the vents, locking bathroom doors, and questioning the safety of every home I entered. Sometimes, in the quiet darkness, I swear I can still feel eyes on me, hidden just out of sight, and I wonder if the watcher is still out there waiting for the next room to invade. **** Months passed, but the shadow of that house never left me. I moved into a small third-floor apartment, no attic, no crawl spaces, and no hidden vents. It was supposed to be safer, a fresh start. Yet sometimes, in the dead silence of night, I'd wake suddenly, convinced I saw a faint blinking red light somewhere just out of reach, like a watcher retreating into the darkness. I never learned who lived in that crawl space or why they chose my home and me specifically. The police never called them, and the trail grew cold. Sometimes I wonder if that person still watches, silently slipping into houses, threading their way through walls, always unseen. Maybe they've already chosen someone else. Maybe someone else is lying awake tonight, afraid to sleep, haunted by the knowledge that they are not alone. And that's the scariest thought of all.